And we're live.
Hello. Welcome to our guests and to our special guest today. So excited to be talking about this topic because as we mentioned before the show, so many people are suffering with mental health challenges and anxiety, and I am one of them. So to hear you discuss this and to hear some of your strategies will be absolutely phenomenal. So thank you for being here.
Great. It's great to be here. Good to see you both.
Okay, so I suppose we better start the questions off as we haven't got all day. Let's just start with like the obvious question that people don't, I mean, I wouldn't necessarily think to ask, but what is anxiety and why is it a problem for people?
Well, anxiety at its core is the anticipation or the experience of a sense of dread of what might be coming, and it's accompanied by physiological symptoms of anxiety, of either anticipating what's coming up, maybe in a performance area, kind of being able to be present in the moment, as opposed to my mind being somewhere else. Yeah. It could be connected to the past as I kind of focus on that. So really it has everything to do but being in the moment, in the present. And then the body just does exactly what it's supposed to do when it gets those messages. It sends the signals that says, I better be ready for this terrible thing coming up. And so it becomes this anxious cycle that just kind of feeds on itself if you don't intervene.
Wow. So you call yourself an anxiety coach. You coach people who experience performance anxiety, and you said that the same tips that you use for this go along with any anxiety. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Well, basically what happens, and the way I kind of conceptualize this and others do also, is that there's kind of these two sides of the brain, and we typically think of left brain thinking as kind of being where we think in terms of words and numbers. It's analytical. It's how we learn something, but it's very black and white. And what happens is the more anxious we get, the more stress we're under. It could be and again, anxiety is not the enemy. It's escalated anxiety that's not managed is the problem. I mean, you want to be anxious if someone's chasing you with a pipe in a parking lot. You want your mind to go fast. The brain waves to really keep moving. You want that kind of stress and anxiety. You don't want that if you have a presentation to give in school today. You don't want that if you're being anxious about trauma that you've experienced in the past and it's interfering with your marriage or your life today. So that left brain thinking kind of feeds it and it keeps it moving and sends that signal to the body. The right side of the brain we typically think of as more calm. It's where artists, they're imaginative, creative, kinesthetic. It's where kind of that state of quiet or flow. You hear athletes talk about being kind of in that state of flow. What happens is that if we don't make that shift during an anxious moment from the left brain thinking that feeds the brain waves to kind of the quiet in the moment, slowing that down, it just creates a cycle, the stress cycle that kind of escalates the anxiety. And then we become afraid of the anxiety. I'm afraid I'm going to get afraid, which makes me more anxious. So the real key, whether it's a performance situation, which is what I primarily work with, people who have stage fright or athletes or musicians on stage or speakers, the key there is how do I switch from that left fast wave brain activity to being in the moment, being quiet, and being focused on whether it's a golf shot, speaking, having to give a presentation at work and a conference call. How do I get myself really grounded is really what I work with.
Okay. And does it take more than one session with you to be grounded? So explain this process to me. Do people come to you because they have an event coming up, or do they come to you for ongoing coaching?
Typically these days, I've done this for 40 years, primarily work with people with anxiety. I was telling Tim, last 15 years or so, I've really specialized and focused on performance anxiety as a performance psychologist. So people typically now will come to me and say, hey, I have to give a big presentation, or I'm a keynote speaker at a conference, or I'm with the pandemic going on, everybody's on Zoom. I thought it'd be real easy. Now I'm panicking getting on the computer screen. and people freezing up. People that normally could sit and talk for an hour with their best friend or their spouse, all of a sudden when I say, hey, you've got to do this on camera, they kind of freeze. Does it take more than one session? Usually it does. And the reason for that is that this is what we call a conditioned response. It's not a mental illness. You don't have something wrong with you. It's just the body and the mind have over time conditioned itself that when the mind kind of says, oh no, tomorrow's the presentation, or oh no, today I've got to be in that tennis match, or whatever it is, the body just hears that, oh no, and goes into its conditioned response of getting ready for something dangerous. So whether that, again, is a specific event or a long-term history of anxiety, the issue's the same. So the good news is, and the reason I love working with anxiety is people get over it. I mean, you can get over it. You don't have to be stuck with it. You don't have to be over-medicated the rest of your life. But it does take some commitment to certain processes and skills and principles that if you apply them, it does slow you down. You can learn, you can, in a sense, unlearn and recondition your mind. That's the great news. You're not stuck with this.
So at the risk of putting yourself out of a job, are there some tips that you can give to people for free about how they can cope with anxiety? Maybe if they're having it on a mild scale or something along that line. And also, like, what kind of level of anxiety do they definitely need some kind of professional help in terms of somebody helping them along?
Well, I think the level of anxiety where they would want the help is when it begins to interfere significantly with your life. I mean, there are most people who have anxiety kind of live with it. It's kind of under the surface. Doesn't keep them from going to the market. Doesn't keep them from having a great relationship or being able to. I mean, most of the clients I work with are pretty high-level business people who still do their presentations, but they just dread that for weeks beforehand, and then they're exhausted afterwards. So, could you get away without it? Yeah, but wouldn't it be nice not to have that? Kind of lost your question there as I was kind of talking.
Well, some tips for people.
Oh, yes.
Just in general about how to overcome anxiety on a small scale.
What you want to be thinking again of is, how do I quiet myself? Okay. And always think in terms of, how do I quiet my thinking, the cognitive side of anxiety, and how do I calm the physical side? The physical side, there's a number of skills you can learn, and they absolutely always work. But the obvious foundational one that everybody talks about is breathing. And the reason they talk about it is it's so powerful. The problem with focused breathing is most people say, oh, I tried that, doctor. Oh, yeah, I did it. Well, tell me about it. And they'll say, oh, I had a big presentation last week, and I practiced it a couple of minutes beforehand. I go, no, it doesn't work like that. Your body has conditioned itself to breathing fast and shallow, this upper lung breathing, and we've got to get it lowered and slowed down. So I teach a breathing technique where I teach that you picture you have a balloon in your stomach, and I ask you to take a slow, deep breath through your nose and fill up the balloon all the way and hold it, and then let it out through your mouth and use the word relax. Couple of things there. You don't have a balloon in your stomach, but what you're doing is you're pushing the air into your lower lungs, because anxiety is always upper lung, fast, shallow breathing. And when we have that kind of breathing, it literally sends a signal to the brain that says there's danger. And what the brain does is says, oh no, and it sends a signal back to the body, and that breathing gets faster. And sometimes we don't even know that's happened. We could be holding our breath. If I snuck up behind Crystal and said, boo, she'd hold her breath. Her body's supposed to do that. But you don't want to be holding your breath when you have something coming up that you're really nervous about. And you'll find yourself gulping for air, trying to just get yourself calmed down. So the key to focused breathing is to practice it. I always tell my clients, you practice it when you don't need it. You practice it every day. You're breathing anyways. It's free, doesn't cost you anything, but you've got to remember to do this slow, focused breathing. I tell my clients every hour, set an alarm, put a Post-it note, because the more you practice slowing yourself down physically when you don't need it, the more it's available when you need it. Because it will show you, if you really do commit to this, that when you start to get anxious, it'll start, you'll know. You'll say, oh, there it is. That's just what we talked about. Then take 2 or 3 slow focused breaths. I always say use the same word as the air is going out. So I say relax or calm. The reason for that is right now the trigger words for most people with anxiety are what if? What if I get there? What if I start getting anxious? What if they see I'm nervous? What if I can't do it? What if I blank out? Those are the trigger words. We want to start using a trigger word that says relax, slow down, and it's connected to that good feeling of those deep breaths of slowing down. So that's the first key principle, is get the physiology under control. And to kind of answer your question, Crystal, it takes practice. Not hard practice. This is not hard. It takes intentional daily practice so that when you need it, you've been doing this. You've been slowing yourself down. So that's one of the ways we deal with the physiology of this. The cognitive side, one of the things I teach is we've got to identify how you're talking to yourself, because that's the culprit, these thoughts. It's not our feelings. Our feelings just follow our thoughts. So if I tell myself, oh my gosh, I have a presentation tomorrow, that voice, I always suggest giving that negative critical voice an actual name. So for example, my name that I use when I get myself worked up like everyone else, and I grew up very anxious, so I identify with this. I gave that critical voice the name Bob. Don't know a Bob. I don't want you to give that name to your ex, and you can't stand her or him. And every time you think of that person, no, give it a name of no, but someone you don't know. And every time you hear Bob, that voice kind of saying, you're going to mess up, you're going to screw up on this, I want you to say, stop it. I mean, literally picture a stop sign, say, stop. Bob, I need you to shut up right now. I have a presentation coming. And then do my slow focused breathing. So what we're trying to do, and that's kind of a quick synopsis of that, it's more involved, but it's still simple, is you're trying to become aware of and slow down your self-talk. Because the good news is you're doing this to yourself. The bad news is you're doing this to yourself. There is no danger really out there for most people. These are anticipatory thoughts that we have. What if this happens? And so we want to listen for that voice. We want to call it out by name. We want to shut up, stop it, take a couple deep breaths, because remember, when Bob starts talking, it escalates the anxiety level. They go together. We got to get them both quiet and slow down. I don't know if that makes any sense. I kind of went through that kind of quickly in terms of the identifying the self-talk, but it's really critical. The third principle that kind of is connected to both the mind and the body is what we call mental rehearsal visualization. What I do is, if you have a specific event coming up and you really want to give yourself the best chance of being present during that, I teach different steps to go through to be able to visualize that. I talk about every day. Let's say you have a presentation coming up in a week or so that's making you anxious. Well, you're already visualizing it going poorly. You're visualizing yourself getting anxious, right? And the more I picture it, a mentor of mine said, what you see in your mind's eye tends to be who you become. So when I start to picture myself doing poorly, the odds start to increase that I'm going to do poorly. The golfers I work with, when they say, oh, I hope I don't hit it in the lake, I hope I don't hit the lake, you know what they do? They hit it in the lake every time. The great golfers don't see the lake because they visualize the goal that they have, which is hitting the ball on the green. So mental rehearsal simply takes you through some steps where it tells you to slow down. You practice this in your mind. This is all in your mind, all in your rehearsal weeks before, every day, telling yourself, okay, I see myself doing well. I can use all your senses. I see myself walking into the room. I can see where the people are standing. I see the audience looking at me. And I walk them through these steps of mental rehearsal so they begin to visualize seeing themselves doing a great job in being present. Right in the middle of visualization, the mental rehearsal, most people get anxious. They start to picture it and get anxious. So I tell them to stop, rewind the tape, start up again, and use your breathing and slow down. As you go through these steps, the visualizing it over and over. By the time you're at the event, you've done it, you've gone through it, you've seen yourself being present and doing a great job. So again, you can see it's not hard, but it takes real intention and practice.
Absolutely. And I can see how this would work with general anxiety as well in some capacity.
Oh, absolutely.
As one who suffers from anxiety, incredibly, sometimes debilitating anxiety. I see how, we forget to breathe. And so you don't realize you've forgotten to breathe. What you feel is your heart palpitations, or you feel like you're going to pass out. Wait a minute.
Yes. Yeah.
Forgot to breathe. I'm not,
Yeah. Yeah. And we get afraid of that.
Yes.
That scares you, doesn't it? I mean, it's very scary to be anxious. And anxiety always is based on control or lack of control. It's always based on an unknown. And so what we do, especially those of us that have struggled with anxiety, we fill in the blanks with what could happen. And then what does that do? It just escalates it. It makes the breathing faster. It makes our thought process, our focus changes. It's interesting that the part of the brain that is for concentration and focus and presence and recall, if you're taking an exam, all those parts of the brain literally begin to shut down when we get anxious. And there's a good reason for that. Again, if the guy's chasing you with a pipe, you don't want to be thinking, I wonder how long before he gets to me. Oh, that's interesting. He's wearing a blue. No, you want to run. You want to beat the crap out of him, right? So we don't want recall. We don't want to be we just want to survive. And so literally, I've worked with students taking big, important exams to get into med school, whatever. They get in the exam. There's smart kids, 4.0. And they blank out because they can't remember that question. Then they panic and recall starts to go out the window. But right after the exam, I can ask them the same question and they can tell me the answer right away. So that's the critical part of even in an exam, just being grounded and centered and making sure your breathing is slow so we can have all those parts of the brain that we need alive.
What has happened in recent times that suddenly so many people are experiencing anxiety? You mentioned you have more clients in recent times. What's going on, and how are we overcoming that?
Well, part of that is what Tim and I were talking before the show of this kind of fear-based media that gets us anxious, right? It really feeds on getting you anxious. What's going to happen? How many? Constantly in the beginning, if you remember, all the statistics of the deaths and just we were bombarded with that. So what that does for most people, for everybody, it triggers that what if it happens to me? It's based on a loss of control, a feeling I'm not in control, and a feeling of what if is going to happen to me. So you combine those, especially with people who already struggle with this, because remember, research is really clear. I don't say remember. Research is clear that people who struggle with this tend to be highly intelligent. They're very creative. They're black and white thinkers. They get a lot accomplished. They overthink. So I would suspect the three of us are probably overthinkers. And people who don't overthink, who aren't real intelligent and creative with things, don't get anxiety. They just say, oh, well, I'll be okay. But the rest of us are sitting here, yeah, but what if it happens to me? And what if I forgot my mask at the market? And pretty soon the unknown of what's going on starts to feed into that. And then you have the loss of control. I can't go to church. I can't go to the market. And all of that begins to weigh on people over time. At first, everybody kind of liked, this is great. I don't have to go to the office. I'm amazed at all the clients I work with that now work out of their home. I just thought everybody was going to want to stay at home, but almost all of them, other than if they have kids and they like to be around, they want to get back to the office. It's known. I can count on it. It has structure. I've got my routine. I don't walk from the kitchen to the living room, which is my office now, to that boundaries are lost. So it's just kind of becomes unsettling because of control issues that have, the longer it's gone on.
Mm.
Yeah. So another question I thought of was a little bit out of order, but what are signs that somebody can see in themselves, or maybe somebody else, that person has got anxiety but either doesn't appreciate they've got anxiety issues, or it's maybe like they're behaving strangely and it's actually anxiety is the issue, it's not, maybe they've misdiagnosed themselves with some other issue. What are the kind of signs externally of somebody suffering from anxiety?
Well, if you're suffering from the kind of anxiety I'm talking about, typically one of the things that starts to happen, and it can happen really slowly and gradually, is your world starts shrinking.
Yeah.
So you might normally have said, hey, I think I'll go out with the gals to a coffee and we're all, a reading group or whatever. And all of a sudden, I don't feel like going today. and I'll go to the market tomorrow. And all of a sudden, without realizing, your world gets tinier. And it sort of becomes what I call a sort of a self-imposed prison because it feels safer. And the nice thing about virtual therapy and coaching is I can work with people all over the world who some can't get out of their house because the world has simply gotten smaller and smaller. And it goes back to control. If I can have less things I've got to have out of my control, the less anxious I feel. So one of the things I always listen for, are you getting out like you used to? Are you doing the kind of things you used to? And they're always going to be rationalizing and coming up with excuses for that. So that's one of the things you want to listen for. Part of it is also just, am I worrying all the time? And it seems obvious, but somebody who just used to be kind of more fun and carefree, maybe under the surface, again, had anxiety, but you'd never know it. They just physiologically, you could just see it in their face, and they're a little nervous. And I mean, obviously, if you're going to give a presentation, sometimes that's obvious. But just on a general level, people, besides the world getting smaller, they physiologically kind of start to worry. They kind of look around more. They come up with all kinds of excuses to put it off and not do it. So it can fool people in the beginning. And the reason, because our mind, that voice I was telling you, can say, oh, you can go to the book club next month. You've been working hard. You deserve a break. Stay home. It's sneaky. It's insidious, because that voice's job is always to protect you. It's you. There's no voice. It's you telling you it'd be safer not to go out. But it doesn't say it that blatantly. It'll just kind of say, oh, you're a little tired. So just be aware of if you start to see that. Sometimes even just communication changes with people. You're a little shorter with people. You're snapping a little more insecure. Those kind of things that, like I said, might always have been there, because there are personality types that get anxiety. Not everybody gets it. And it doesn't. Some people go their whole life, don't have a panic attack, don't have anxiety attacks, but it's always under the surface. And sometimes it just takes a trigger for that.
You said you had your own journey with anxiety. How have you journeyed through that? Have you overcome it? Are you still journeying through it? Kind of take us through your own process. Yeah.
My anxiety was primarily focused on public speaking. I mean, literally, when I was in a little club called the Indian Guides when I was little, and my father was a father-son group, and I would every couple of months, someone in the group would have to give a presentation, and I was like 7, and I would just dread the day that they were saying, "Hey, Nikki, you're next month." So I would spend a month worrying about this. So I was just anxious presenting, being in front of people. I was more of an introvert, a little more quiet. Nothing wrong with being an introvert. That's kind of gets a bad rap, but if it keeps you from doing what you want, that's not good. And all the way through junior high, I would get asthma attacks when it was time for me to speak in Spanish class and do my report. I just miraculously would get an asthma attack on that day. And then all the way through college and graduate school. And it really wasn't until when I was getting my doctorate, where a woman asked me at our church, would you be willing to speak to our women's group about stress? And I said, oh, I'm sorry, I'm not able to do that. And I told a friend of mine that in class, and he said, what are you talking about? Speaking is a great way to promote yourself. And I realized I said no because I was terrified of doing that, and made a commitment. I remember him telling me, he goes, you got to get over that. You're going to be a shrink, and you're going to help people. You better get over this. And I basically began the process of learning the kind of things I teach people, how to get back in charge of myself. And then ended up literally using public speaking as the only way I primarily promoted my practice. And I spoke everywhere, and that was part of how I got over it. But a lot of people say that go to Toastmasters. I mean, Toastmasters is great, but it isn't necessarily great at teaching these skills. It's a great place to practice these skills. So do I still get anxious? Every single time I speak, I still get anxious. It's still there. But now I slow it down quicker. I catch it sooner. I got myself back in charge of myself. And I do a pretty good job, but it isn't ever anxiety free, because I have a personality type that just fits who gets anxiety. And I've got to just kind of be aware of that and trust that, and not be afraid of it, not be afraid of anxiety. Just say, oh, there it is. I caught it. Good. I'm going to slow it down. I'm not going to fight it. fighting anxiety feeds it.
Yeah. It's interesting you were talking about their experience with doing things, because it's like I'm experienced with podcasting. I'm now got experience with doing video thing. But if I had to go on a stage and talk, I know I would be massively anxious, even though it's virtually the same kind of experience in many ways, being on video and being on stage. How important is the context of a situation, and are there any tricks you can do to make you think, well, I've already done this. I've done like online conferences or whatever. Why can't I do that to live events? Is there any kind of context switching you can do there as a kind of trick?
Yeah. Well, like I said earlier, when people who have trouble with speaking in any situation, I always ask them, do you have a lot of anxiety talking to your husband? Do you have a lot of anxiety talking to your best girlfriend? Oh, no, I could talk forever. It's the mind says, no, this is different. I'm going to be in front of people. Well, in front of people, some people can speak in front of a live group, no problem, but they can't do Zoom. Others reverse. And so that tells us that the enemy is this message I give myself. So the first thing, Tim, is basically what you said, and most people know it, but they don't do it. Say, wait a minute, slow down. I can do this.
Yeah.
Because it's not a speech. I'm having a conversation with this audience. The other part of that, though, because you've already decided that this is different, your body is getting ready. It's kind of getting conditioned to make it different. See, and then you get anxious about it. You say, see, it is different, because I don't get anxious online. I get anxious in person. And you're just this sort of lying to yourself starts happening. So being able to say, hey, wait a minute, I've learned some skills. I don't need them online because I do great, but I've learned how to slow myself down. I've learned how to quiet that voice. I'm going to practice visualizing this so that when I start speaking on stage and things start opening up again, I've got some tools that I know will slow me down. That will not be perfect. You're not going for perfect. We're not going for no anxiety. We're going for managing it until you say, hey, I did a pretty good job. I got anxious right in the middle of it. But remember what Dr. Nick said? He said, just take a breath. Just take a breath. No one will know. Just take a little breath. Slow down. Get grounded again. And being able to be aware of that even throughout the presentation. Because anxiety comes as you anticipate it. So it could be the night before, the month before. So you start then. I always tell people, when did you start getting anxious? Oh, when I started getting on stage. And I go, no, you didn't. Really tell me. When they asked me to speak, that's when they started getting anxious. That's when we start learning to slow it down then. The week before, the month before. We don't wait to get on stage to apply this. So you can, I mean, the great news is you can learn to control it because you're the problem. I'm the problem. I mean, if it was out there, if people are throwing tomatoes at you. When I first started speaking, when I came home, I had spoken to about 100 people. My wife asked me, how'd it go? I said, it was terrible. Oh, no. Were they throwing tomatoes at you? Were they walking out? Were they booing? No, there was a guy in the fourth row. He had a plaid shirt. He was yawning, and he looked at his watch. And she goes, yeah, what about everybody else? Well, I don't know. I was looking at this one guy, and that's all I focused on. And then that got me more anxious. And then I started talking faster, and then I just couldn't wait for it to be over. So I had to learn. I hope you like me. I hope you're not bored. But if you are, there's nothing I can do. I've got some stuff to share with you. I mean, I had to keep working on that thought because that was my trigger. I'd find somebody yawning every time, and then that would define me. That would define me as a speaker.
Wow. You have given us some great tips, not only for performance anxiety, but I can use it in general. So thank you for that. Where can our audience find you if they want to get a hold of you or hire you as a coach?
Well, the best thing, you can go to my website. There's a couple ways to get there, but the easiest way is to go to thefearlessperformer.com, thefearlessperformer.com. On there, you can subscribe, get a free anxiety roadmap that I offer, so you can ask for that. There's a little link on there where you can ask if you want to do a coaching call. I offer a complimentary call, a full coaching session. If you're interested in that, it'll give you there's a place to sign up for that. I then find out if we meet virtually by this way and find out if we're a good fit or not, and if I can help you or not, and go from there.
Good.
Well, it's been great to have you on the show, and I'm having my end of show anxiety attack, which I managed to overcome in the last couple of episodes by pointing out to people watching on the YouTube replay that they can subscribe. they can subscribe somewhere where there should be a card appear over Nick's head towards the end of the show, where you can click on and subscribe to the show. So thanks so much for being on the show. Have you got any final words, Christelle or Nick?
I guess my final word is there's hope. I mean, when people come to me after seeing a lot of people, and I'm not saying I'm a miracle worker, but you can get over this. And when you lose hope, you quit trying, you avoid things, you get discouraged, you put yourself down, and there's no reason for that. So again, it's not easy, but it's really not hard. It just takes intention. And I want to just leave you with there's hope for this.
Well, thank you so much for that.
Thank you,
everybody.
Nick.
Thank you for having me. Thank you. Nice to meet you both. Bye.
This is terrifying for me.
I've made more money in the last 3 years than I did in the previous 7.
Cliche shit, you know.